Hello and welcome to episode 4 of this series. In this episode, I want to talk about validating the data that you get from your backend API and do some error handling. And of course, I want to tell you something about the code we wrote in the previous episode. There was an issue that I discovered after I recorded and uploaded the video. So I fixed it and I want to show it. I want to show the fix to you. The objectives of this episode is to use Zod to validate incoming data from your backend APIs, is to guard against malformed responses from external sources. We are going to handle API errors with custom messages, and we want to keep data validation consistent across client and server. Before I get started with the topic of this course, of this episode, let me show you the fix that I talked about coming from the previous episode. So if you remember, in the previous episode, we updated the add book component, and we forgot to add this portion of the code, which is for the book year. So the year in which a book was published. So we have the author, the name of the author, of course. We've got the birth year of the author, and we've got the optional nationality. But we forgot to add this. So if you don't add this, for example, the Zod will fail silently. So for example, let me show you what I mean. In the add book component here, yeah, we're here. So we wrote this piece of code to console log something valid book submitted with the data, of course, when the form is submitted. So if you don't add, for example, this portion of the code, which will of course make the data invalid, Zod will not console log anything. So it will fail silently, as it is sometimes said. So always remember to double check everything. I discovered that, as I said, after I recorded the video, uploaded it. Now I wanted to show the fix to you. So this is committed in the branch for episode number 3. So if you clone the repository, if you navigate to that branch, you will see this fix in there. And of course, it is in branch number 4. Back to the topic of this episode. In this episode, again, we are going to create a fake API. We're going to simulate an API that returns a list of books. And we want to validate each book entry that we get from the server. We want to display the data, even if only if the data is valid based on our schema, and we want to handle and log bad or malformed responses. Question: why do we need to validate the data we get from our server? So even though the backend server is trusted, it makes perfect sense to validate the data you get from your backend API, because the backend API could send the front end for example, some piece of data that contains null values, undefined values. For whatever reason, it makes perfect sense to validate the data that you get from your backend API in your front end. And of course, that gives you a strict runtime contract, meaning that the schema that you define and the rules that you have in there will kick in when the application is running, and those rules are actually enforced at runtime, not just at compile time. So suppose that we have like a list of books that we are getting from the backend API, and we want to show them in a component. We can use Zod to validate those books. In this episode, I want to create a mock API, a fake version. We're not going to create a full-blown API. The reason is that I want the course to be solely focused on Zod. If you want to know more about communicating with a backend API using React, there are playlists on the channel that you can watch. So let's go ahead, create this folder, services, create this fake API TS file, and put this code in there. So this code, as you can see, it's it contains a getBooks function, which is going to asynchronously return an array with 2 books. The first book is supposed to be valid based on our schema, but the second one is invalid. For example, the year doesn't contain an actual year. So let me go ahead, and here I'm going to create a folder called services. I already have these services, yes. and fake API.ts. And let me go ahead and create this code. So if you want to know more about asynchronous programming in JavaScript, I've got this playlist on the channel that you can watch, asynchronous programming in JavaScript. There are two book objects in this array that the front end is supposed to validate and show. So yeah, this is our fake version of our backend API. Now back to the nodes. Then we want to validate the response that we get from our backend API using Zod. So we're going to create this book list component instead of the pages, right? And we're going to fetch the books from this backend API using this getBooks, function. So if you take a look, there are some lines of code that we haven't seen before. For example, here we are creating this book list schema. Based on the book schema that we have defined, we are going to create an array. So this schema basically means that we expect to see an array of valid book schema objects. So based on the book schema that we defined. Then we've got, some local states, like for example, books and errors. Books is going to be, an array of valid, books based on the schema. We are inferring the type. I told you about, type inference using Zod. And then we've got this errors, state. Let me do something. Let me get you to Visual Studio Code, write the code for this, book list component, and then talk about it. So here in the pages, I'm going to create this file called booklist.tsx. And I want to create this component. If you want to know more about effects, states, props, again, I've got a playlist on the channel that you can watch. I am importing useEffect. useState. useEffect is used to handle side effects. And the book list schema is there. The component is called book list. Let's create the two local states using useState hook. We need two states, books and errors. Then the useEffect is going to load the data. So a side effect means something other than rendering the component, and data fetching is a side effect. And so useEffect is used for handling side effects. And then we will render the component itself. So this is the template. So we need a title, and then we are going to render any potential errors, and then map over the books array and render things. So let me save here and continue. So now let's continue with the note. So validate response using Zod. As I said, we have created this book list component or page, and this page is gonna validate some books and show them if they're valid. Let's go through the code. First off, we're importing things. So we're importing, Z from Zod. We're importing our book schema. We're importing the getBooks function from our fake API, and we're importing useEffect and useState, which are two React hooks. useEffect is used to manage side effects, like for example, data fetching. Side effect means things that are not, directly related to loading your component or rendering your component. So for example, data fetching compared to the rendering of a component is considered to be a side effect. And of course, useState is for local state. GetBooks is that function in our mock API. Book schema is the schema that we have defined before, and the Z from Zod library. Then we have this line of code. So this line of code is going to create a new schema for us. This schema expects an array of the book schema that we defined earlier. And then we are creating two local states in our component. The first one is books. It is using type inference to infer the type from the book schema. And then it is an array. So it is an array of this type, which is going to get inferred. And then we've got this errors state, which is either string or null. And then we have the following piece of code. I guess this is the most important part of our component or page. We're using use effect. We're using the get books from that fake API. Because this returns like a promise, we can attach then to this. When we get the data, we're going to safe parse it to validate it. If the data is valid, we're going to do this. If it's not valid, we're going to do something else. So the use effect is used for fetching data from our API, fake API, and validate it within the book list component. And this happens when the book list component first mounts. Mounts means render to the DOM for the first time. So again, if you want to learn more about use effect, if you want to know more about hooks, states, and props, just check out the playlist that I have on my channel about states, hooks, and props in React. Then we've got this use effect hook. So it takes two parameters. This is the first parameter, which is where you kind of do whatever this use effect is supposed to do, and the next one is your dependency array. So the first argument is a callback function. This is where your side effect will reside, which in this case is data fetching from our fake API. And the second parameter or argument is our dependency array. In this case, it is empty. So it means that the effect runs only once after the initial render, like the, for example, component did mount in class components. What happens inside of this callback function? Of course, what we're doing is that we're using the getBooks function from our API, and then we are gonna, that is gonna return a promise. So we're gonna, get a list of books when the promise is resolved, and then we're gonna validate it using Zod, using safe parse. Do you remember safe parse? We talked about safe parse in previous episodes. So book list schema is a Zod schema that we defined in this component. And this expects an array of valid book objects. When I say valid, I mean based on the book schema that we have. Safe parse tries to validate that data at runtime, and the result of this safe parse operation is either a valid, success result or failure. So if the data is valid, result.success is going to be true. Again, take a look at the this result const. So whatever safe parse is going to return, we're going to capture it in this object. Then we can go ahead and check the success key or property of this result. If it is true, it means that the data was valid. So the parse data is valid and it is available at result.data. We can consume it now. If it is invalid, result.success is going to be false, and detailed errors are in the result error. So we are using result.error, result.data, result.success. So if validation succeeds, use result.data, set that local state, set errors to null. If validation fails, get the reason why the validation failed using result.error, and set that local state to this string. And then the template is going to do what? Is going to check that local state. If there is an error, it's going to render it inside of a paragraph tag. Otherwise, it's going to iterate that book's local state. For each element is going to render the title, the author name, and the year. And that's it. Let me go ahead and do something. Yeah, in the notes, I have talked about this. We need to add this book list to our app component. So I'm going to go ahead to my app component. Right now, we're only rendering the book list, the add book. So I'm going to go ahead and render book list as well here. So the book list says that some books could not be loaded due to validation errors. If I go to my fake API, this book is invalid. So because there are some errors in the data that the fake API is returning, this array of books, this is the message that we get. I can go ahead and remove this invalid book. Still, I do not get the error. I do not get the book. The reason is that based on the schema that we defined for the author, the age of the author needs to fall within a certain range. So if the author was born prior to 1900, we consider that author to be too old. And if the author is born after 2020, we consider that author to be too young. So based on this age, we will not get that author. But if I change this to, for example, 1900 or 1901, no, 1900, we will see the, author and the book in there, because now there is one single, book, and that is a valid book. And of course, I can come here, copy, paste this, and create another book with, let's say, another valid, birth year for the author, another publication year for the book, and I can refresh and get that book. So a piece of data, an array containing two book objects, is going to be fetched from my API. So this API is, by the way, a fake version of our backend API. The focus is not on API development in this course. And my component is going to get that data using this use effect, right? It's a side effect. It's going to fetch that data, and it's going to validate that data. And only if the data is valid, it's going to, render that data here. So this is kind of like the, combination of having a backend API as well as doing validation using Zod. And that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Again, if that's the case, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.